So today we're going to talk a bit about fashion and why NASA clothing is so popular. All of a sudden you're seeing people wearing NASA shirts, NASA jackets, NASA shoes. My entire life I've lived and no one was talking about NASA, especially supposedly the cool people. And the only time you'd hear about NASA my entire life is whenever there was a launch, which is very rare. But now, for whatever reason, you're seeing NASA clothing everywhere, and we're going to discuss why that might be. But first off, I want to thank Greg. I don't know if I should reveal his last name, so I'll keep that private. But he PayPal'd me $35, and he said, "This is for diapers for your new baby. Thank you very much. I appreciate that." And that helps also bring these videos to you. Now, before we get into the heavy fashion stuff, it was interesting. I've planned this video for a while. But last night, I just happened to be listening to a Catholic sermon, and the priest was talking about appropriate clothing for men and women. And basically for men, he said that men should not dress like slobs, go out like in an old t-shirt and ratty gym shorts, but they should also not dress in a way that's kind of effeminate, a way that's overly fancy, like a fancy boy. But you're supposed to look good, but also look masculine. So don't adorn yourself with all this flamboyant stuff. And now I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt here, and let me get into why that is. I had a video from a couple weeks ago, and I was wearing a somewhat tropical looking shirt, and someone criticized me for it and said, never wear Hawaiian shirts. And if you're going to tell me to do something, of course, whenever you tell someone to do something, that just makes them want to do it even more. So as like a small act of rebellion, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Now, I didn't buy this Hawaiian shirt. I actually got this because I acted in a movie and my character was always wearing Hawaiian shirts. And I kept some of them just kind of as souvenirs. I didn't really expect to wear them. So now I'm breaking them out for these videos. And maybe it can become a trademark, I don't know. But I think this still kind of fits into appropriate dress, kind of like what the priest was talking about, because I live in a tropical place. I don't live in Hawaii, but I live in a very tropical place, so I think that this still fits into part of looking good, looking professional, and looking appropriate to your environment. Now, I go to the mall. This is how I like to spend my days. I have errands to do and stuff, but whenever I have an errand to do at the mall, I like to go to this one particular restaurant, sit down, relax, eat my fried chicken, have a beverage, and I kind of like to people watch. And one of the things I've noticed is these days, most people, they're wearing these shoes. The brand is Itsuka Tiger. I don't know if you know what that is. I have some images for you. So this is basically what it is. It's kind of a old school Asics type of athletic shoe, like the kind of shoe that you might buy in the 60s, the 70s, the early 80s, I suppose. So it's kind of the old school Asics athletic shoe. And if people aren't wearing those, they're wearing some other type of old style athletic shoe. Like if they're wearing Nikes, it looks like Nikes from the early 80s. If they're wearing Adidas, it looks like Adidas from the early 80s. These very retro style. And you kind of think, wouldn't shoe technology have gotten better in the past 30, 40 years? You would think that people would want the latest, most modern, up-to-date tech on this. But this reminds me of a few different concepts that I'd like to share with you. One of them is called the 100th monkey effect. And basically that's a story. Some people say it happened exactly like the story. Other people say that there may have been liberties to illustrate a point. Doesn't matter. The story does illustrate a point, and the 100th monkey effect is basically these researchers. They were observing monkeys, and there's all these potatoes around growing. And the monkeys would eat the potatoes, and the researchers would eat the potatoes. But the researchers, they would take the potato, and they would take it over to the river, and they would wash it off in the river. Well, the monkeys started noticing this, and before you knew it, one monkey, would grab his potato, and before he would eat it, he would take it over to the river and he'd wash it off. And then the other monkeys would watch that monkey, and they would take their potatoes over to the river and wash them off. And eventually, when it reached the 100th monkey, and it doesn't have to literally be 100, that just means it's reached critical mass, And all the monkeys on the island, they wouldn't even question it. Even when the researchers were gone, they would still take their potatoes over to the river and wash them off. And the point of the story is that once something gets in the consciousness to a certain point, when enough people start thinking the same way and doing the same thing, it just becomes accepted, and that's the way it's done, and people don't even question it. It's kind of like the story of the 4-minute mile as well. You remember that story? For years, throughout human history, they thought running a mile in 4 minutes was impossible. It was just accepted and believed that that was impossible. No human's ever going to be able to run a mile in 4 minutes. But then finally, one guy did run a mile in 4 minutes. But then what happened after that? Well, the very next day, another guy ran a mile in 4 minutes. And then it became more and more guys running miles in 4 minutes to where today it's commonplace. Once they got that idea in their head and it was possible, it became this accepted idea that everyone believed and just accepted. So that's kind of how these things are with fashion. I'm not a slave to fashion myself, but it's interesting observing these things, like with the shoes, these Itsuka Tiger shoes or these old style shoes. All of a sudden, everyone's wearing it. It's a couple, 2 or 3 months ago, I would leave the house and probably 75% of the people where I live, they were wearing some article of clothing that said champion. It could be is usually a champion shirt or sweatshirt, champion sweatpants, a champion hat. Oh, my Bible fell. Hopefully the Lord is pleased with what I'm saying, but we're going to get to NASA clothing and why that might be, but I'm sure these things apply to where you live as well with the champion clothing. Or like before that, you'd go out and you'd see all these people wearing white t-shirts that say Supreme with a red block across it. And now we're going to get to NASA because every time I go to the mall, I see all these people all of a sudden wearing NASA sweatshirts, NASA jackets, NASA hoodies, whatever. And like I said, why is that? My entire life, the only time you'd hear about NASA is usually from people that are quote-unquote nerds. But now all the cool people are wearing these clothes. I'll show you what I mean here. So I'm sure you've seen people wearing this. I'm sure that in this trend comes from the United States, but there's all these NASA clothes everywhere, every time you go out. And I know it's from America too because I've seen on TV characters wearing this on TV shows whenever I'm flipping through the channels. I've seen popular YouTubers from America wearing this stuff. So all of a sudden, NASA clothing, let me come back here. All of a sudden, NASA clothing's everywhere. And I don't think most people are thinking, why is that? Why is NASA the hot new fashion statement all of a sudden? Well, I have my own theory about this, and this part's just a theory. I believe that because there's so much effort to combat so-called conspiracy theories, one of the main ones, and one of the really old conspiracy theories that's picked up a lot of steam lately is the moon landing. A lot of people believe it's a hoax. Now, me personally, I don't really care what you guys believe in terms of the moon landing one way or another. I personally believe we did land on the moon, but it's kind of funny when it comes to some of these beliefs that there's certain things that you can believe. First of all, there's empowering beliefs, there's disempowering beliefs, and then there's things like the moon landing that, quite frankly, it doesn't really matter in your life. It doesn't make a difference in your life one way or another what you believe. Kind of like evolution versus creationism. I always believed in evolution. There's other guys that believe in creationism, but it wasn't a big deal to me because it's like, well, they can believe whatever they want. Like, I've never made any money believing in evolution. Believing in evolution's never really done anything for me, and it's not going to do anything for anyone unless you work as a teacher or you work as some sort of evolutionary biologist, unless you work in some kind of field. There's beliefs that don't affect your life one way or another unless you go out and you tell everyone about them and then they think you're a crazy guy. And now we're seeing it in Western societies and especially in Europe. They're passing laws that you have to believe certain things, but that just makes you question them more. But that's my feeling. I don't know we landed on the moon because, quite frankly, I believe we did, but that's nothing more than a statement of faith. We all have faith. Everyone has faith. They have faith in something. And if you say that we landed on the moon, especially if you're a regular person, you're not some sort of scientist where this is your field, that's nothing more than a statement of faith, because I don't know that. I'm just believing the official story. If someone else doesn't want to believe the official story, that's fine. But I believe the reason that they're trying to make NASA this hot new fashion statement, this very cool thing, is for a few different reasons. One, they want to combat all these conspiracy theories about the moon landing was a hoax, and there's all this effort, the government and such coordinating, not just the U.S. government, but coordinating with these tech companies to, especially on YouTube, to squash and make so-called conspiracy theory videos. Like you won't be able to find them, so they'll make them basically hidden in their search. So they want to quell all this people questioning the official narrative of things. So that's one reason. And the other is, of course, these government programs like NASA, they cost a lot of money. So you don't want people doubting, because then people would be like, well, are we wasting our money if people don't even think it's real? So I believe NASA is a current fashion statement because that's what they want it to be. Someone high up at the top. They wanted it to trickle down to all these average people, and it's just repetition, seeing these things. Kind of like how Coca-Cola, they pay just to have their logo someplace. They always want it going into your conscience as well as your subconscious. So they always have to get that out there. They want you to think it's cool, and they're justifying it, and they're trying to combat people going against the official narrative of their stories. So these are things to think about, especially, as I talked about earlier, that 100th monkey effect, where it's an interesting idea, especially just observing people in their fashion, like how fashion changes every few months. Like I said, 3 months ago, it was Champion, and now I still see a lot of people wearing Champion clothing, but it's maybe not even half of what it was 3 months ago. It's falling out of the consciousness. And right now, it's these Itsuka Tiger shoes. I'm sure 3-4 months from now, the number of people I see wearing those will probably be less. How these fashion things, they go in cycles. It's interesting. But it's just interesting to see people following this. Especially, it's interesting to see some of these social media influencers, especially the ones that have been around for a while, that are getting into middle age. Guys in their 30s that, especially these childless guys in their 30s, that they're still trying to be a influencer, and they're still trying to dress like they're very young. Listening to that Catholic sermon, I thought a lot about who's my current idol, being a new father, Ward Cleaver. And if you looked at the clothes in the 1950s, how men dressed, not talking about their office clothing, because of course he wore a suit and tie. Look, you can see there I have a suit hanging there too. So I squeeze myself into a suit on occasion myself. But if you look at the casual clothing in the 1950s, if you look at the shirts they wore, the pants they wore, how pleasing it was to their aesthetic, their bodies, they looked masculine without looking effeminate, like you see so many types today, especially some of these Hollywood types with like Johnny Depp and his long hair and all his scarves and the jewelry and that kind of thing. So keep these concepts in mind, and we have a lot of other videos on this channel for you to enjoy that you can go watch now. But before you go watch those other videos, leave me a comment. Thanks. We'll be together again very soon.